before we get started, I feel like I must address this. It's fine for a comic book, but that's a dumb name for a movie. So last week I discussed how Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns is an overrated book. And by that, I mean I said it's good but not great about 20 times. To summarize, while it's certainly a great book and essential reading if you're a Batman fan, it's important to remember that there are other Batman stories out there that are just as good, if not better, than Dark Knight Returns. Now, I don't want to give you a typical list of the best Batman comics. A 5-minute search on Google will give you that much faster and by much more qualified people than me. They usually all contain the same books though, like Long Halloween, Dark Victory, The Killing Joke, Year One, Gotham by Gaslight, Arkham Asylum, so forth and so on. Instead, what I'm going to do is recommend 5 lesser-known books that don't typically appear on all of these lists. These are all books that tell great and compelling stories and explore the Batman from different angles, and in my opinion deserve to be spoken in the same breath as all the other great Batman books, if not more so. So no more delays, let's do this. Our first top 5 list. Here we go. Alright. Number 5. So this one's kind of a cheat because I see this pop up a lot on Best Batman Stories lists. But it always appears way too low on these lists, which is a shame because to me it tells a very important part of the Batman mythology. The Man Who Laughs by Ed Brubaker and Doug Mahnke tells the story of Batman's first encounter with the Clown Prince of Crime, the Joker. The story takes place not too long after Batman Year One and is the first time Batman encounters a true supervillain, someone who's not just a mobster or a common criminal. Okay, yes, to be fair, Matt Wagner's Dark Moon Rising books are the first time in Batman's career that he fights true supervillains, but this is the first time he fights a supervillain that matters. We all know the Joker is Batman's greatest enemy, and this book delves into the history of that, showing where that rivalry came from and why it's so potent. We see how Batman learns to deal with somebody who's more dangerous and insane than anyone he's ever dealt with before. I mentioned in a previous video that The Dark Knight was heavily influenced by this book, and whether or not the filmmakers actually admit to that, it's open for debate. But after reading the book and seeing the movie, or vice versa, it's hard not to see the connections. It's definitely a book that's worth reading, and it's short too, so you can get it done like in less than a weekend. Plus, if you get one of the newer editions, you get a bonus Ed Brubaker Batman story where he teams up with the Golden Age Green Lantern Alan Scott to try and solve a murder mystery in Gotham City. It's pretty sweet. Number 4. I've mentioned previously that Hush may be my favorite Batman comic of all time. That said, I understand a lot of people don't particularly like that book. In fact, many think that's the most overrated Batman book of all time. It's often considered too long, not very deep, the ending is pretty weak, and it's fine, those are all valid opinions. But what's funny is I've also seen people who don't like Hush often come out and say they really like its unofficial sequel, Heart of Hush. Written by Paul Dini and illustrated by Dustin Nguyen, this story actually acts as Hush's last attempt to defeat Batman once and for all. See, this story came out around the same time Grant Morrison's Batman R.I.P. epic was going on, where the Black Glove was trying to kill Batman. And in this, Hush is trying to get to him before the Black Glove can. But not only does he go all out in his plan, we get to see a little bit more of his backstory, and the twisted history we have with his mother, and just why he's jealous and hateful of Bruce Wayne so much. It's that backstory that elevates Heart of Hush over the original in a lot of people's eyes. And while I wouldn't necessarily call this book better, it's certainly the ultimate companion piece, and definitely worth reading if you enjoyed the original Hush. And it's miles ahead of what they tried to do after Hush originally, trust me. Number 3. Now by now we all know the story of Nightfall. It's often considered the biggest Batman story ever told. It took place over the course of a year and a half and went through every Batman book that was being published at the time, and the aftermath had dramatic ramifications for all the characters involved. And while it's pretty good, I don't know if I'd necessarily call it the biggest Batman story of all time. For that, I'd have to give it to No Man's Land. In this story, Gotham City is ravaged by a massive 7.6 earthquake, leaving it in complete and total ruins. Bruce Wayne actually goes to the United States government to try and get aid, but they're all like, nope, screw that, Gotham's too much of a shithole, cutting you off. They blow up all the bridges, barricade all the entrances, and declare it a no man's land. Nobody's allowed in or out. With no help on the way and all hope lost, Gotham City is basically reduced into a post-apocalyptic state. And over the course of a year, in both the story and in real time, Batman and his teammates must relearn how to deal with both the people and the city. What's great is that even though this is part of one big story, it's mostly made up of smaller individual stories that tell their own complete tale, and each one of them is more riveting than the next. Now I have to be honest, if No Man's Land has one major flaw, it's trying to read it. Let me explain. Now like I said, this book came out over the course of a year and it spanned pretty much every Batman comic. That includes Robin, Nightwing, Azrael, so forth and so on. The series was originally collected into 5 separate trade paperbacks, which I own. There happen to be missing a lot of the side stories, like the Azrael books or some of the Robin books, things like that, but it tells the main story beats and it gets the point across really, really well. Recently, DC re-released No Man's Land in 4 volumes containing every single issue of the series. That may be the way you want to go if you're okay with paying $30 a volume. But it's still technically not the whole story because the actual earthquake took place in a book called Cataclysm, and this is now out of print and not really easy to find. It's not all that necessary in the end, but Cataclysm does provide some context, and it's something you should be aware of. Also worth mentioning is the actual novelization of No Man's Land by Greg Rucka, one of the main writers on this comic book series. It's actually pretty good, and if real books are your thing, you might want to check this out. Number 2. So a couple of years ago when The Dark Knight Rises was in development and a lot of people didn't know what the story was going to be about, there was a lot of internet speculation that it was going to be based on the story Prey by Doug Monk, Paul Gulansy, and Terry Austin. But while I love Dark Knight Rises, I can't help but wonder if it would have been better had they actually based it off of Prey. See, this story takes place at a time when the police and the mayor's office do not trust Batman one bit. He's still seen as a criminal vigilante and he's actively hunted down, and he has no friends except for Commissioner Gordon. The mayor actually goes out and hires Professor Hugo Strange as a consultant to the police so he can help them catch Batman and figure out who he is. Strange creates a smear campaign against Batman to further the public's distrust in him, and actually goes and hypnotizes an officer named Max Court into becoming the Night Scourge, a more brutal vigilante who's convinced he's better than the Batman. The story is all about Batman's struggle to try and prove himself to not just the cops and the government, but to the city at large, to show that he is the actual good guy in the story. This really would have been the perfect follow-up to The Dark Knight. The Night Scourge could have easily been replaced by Bane and nobody would have cared. Also, Catwoman's in the story, so that could have stayed. This is a story about Batman at his lowest point, and questioning whether or not what he's doing is the right thing to do. And in the end, he comes out on top, and he shows that, yeah, this is the right thing to do. I should be doing this. Which is probably what The Dark Knight Rises should have gotten across a little bit better. Number 1. After the events of the DC crossover Infinite Crisis, Batman, Robin, and Nightwing all took a year off from crime fighting to reevaluate themselves. Yeah, Superman and Wonder Woman did that too, but we're not talking about them, we're talking about Batman. During this year away from Gotham, he entrusted the city to Harvey Dent, who had his face and his psyche fixed during the events of Hush. 1 year after the events of Infinite Crisis, Batman and Robin returned to Gotham City to claim it as their own in Face to Face by James Robinson, Leonard Kirk, and Don Kramer. The duo hunt down a serial killer who's taken out a lot of low-level criminals like the KGBs and the Ventriloquist, all using an MO very similar to Two-Face. But wait, Harvey Dent is back to normal. Two-Face doesn't exist anymore, right? Right. This is one of my favorite Batman stories ever. Whenever people come up to me and ask me, hey, what's a good Batman story I never heard of, I always throw this one out at them. It's all about Batman laying his flag down in Gotham and letting the world know this is where he stands on pretty much everything. It establishes a brand new status quo for Batman and brings back a lot of old tropes we were used to that have been missing from the comics, like James Gordon coming back to be commissioner. And the growing amount of distrust that's being leveled on Harvey Dent leads to a predictable ending, but it's actually played very tragically and very effectively. Lastly, this is one of the best Batman and Robin stories ever told. At the end, there's a very touching scene between Bruce Wayne and Tim Drake that redefines their relationship for the future. That is, of course, until Grant Morrison took over right after this story and killed off Bruce Wayne and made Damian Robin. But hey, for the time, it was nice, and all the other Bat books definitely reflected the changes that came from this. And that's it, my top 5 underappreciated Batman stories. You can find these all on Amazon or on Comixology, so when you're done watching this, go out and get these books. You will not be disappointed. If you are disappointed, let me know in the comments below, or on Facebook and Twitter. Or if you're not disappointed, or if you have some recommendations, let me know. And as always, like if you like, subscribe if you really like, share this video with your friends. If they need a new Batman book to read that isn't done by Frank Miller, this is the video to show them. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time. This book is often credited with being the first dark and serious Batman story that completely washes away the stench of the old Adam West show. First of all, that show is amazing, and everybody knows that no matter how hard they try to hide it.
Number 2.
Number 2.
Lots of fan art also. My Little Pony. Our favorite.
Our favorite.
You watched an entire documentary on
I
Bronies.
did. I did.
I walked in on half of it.